Okay, sweet. All right, so today we are look at this, guys. It's what a treat. We're starting Aristotle. This week, so we're going to do 2 weeks on Aristotle. This week is the more boring one, I think. It's sort of laying foundation, just sort of like bringing us from Plato into Aristotle. Next week is it gets like really interesting because then we talk about like politics, but we have to sort of lay the sort of ethical grounds, the sort of like what is an individual to Aristotle, because it's just we're not going to be able to understand what he means when he's talking about politics unless we talk about the individual, which is how we conceive of the reality, you know. So anyway, we're starting with Aristotle's on ethics. That's the book he's holding right here in the picture. And before we do that, what is this? Why is it doing this? Slide 2, right? You guys are looking at slide 2? Slide 2. Great. Last week we talked about Benjamin Constant, liberty of the ancients compared with that of the moderns. We laid out this idea of modern liberty versus ancient liberty. Modern liberty is the pursuit of personal independence and private happiness. These are the things that we sort of are familiar with when we talk about freedom. Ancient liberty, on the other hand, is this idea of political action and the pursuit of public happiness, which is sort of strange to us. It still should be strange. It just doesn't really quite make a whole lot of sense as far as equating that with liberty. Aristotle is going to help us understand what ancient liberty is. And so over the course of comparing modern and ancient liberty, civic freedom versus materialist freedom, we are going to look at ancient liberty up close. Like I said, Aristotle is going to be our key to this. So Aristotle is a case study. He was born in 384 before Common Era to a rich Macedonian family. Today we would call them Macedonian. This was all part of ancient Greece. But today there's a country called North Macedonia because Greece, the modern country, is really upset that they can't really lay claim to the ancient region of Macedonia. And so they say like, well, Macedonia was always a part of Greece. It's sort of the same argument that Russia makes about Ukraine right now. It was always a part of Russia. Greece says Macedonia was always a part of Greece. If you want your own country, we'll call you North Macedonia. And then so therefore we can claim Aristotle and we can claim Alexander the Great and all these folks that are from Macedonia. But Macedonians,
like
what? Huh?
Kind of like Jerusalem in Israel.
Yeah, it's the same story over and over again. That's true. But famously, the Macedonians, modern Macedonians hate Greece. They hate the Greeks. Well, actually, a lot of that is based on, some bad vibes that were started.
So wait, Howard, sorry.
What?
If I liked Israel or I liked Russia's point of view, who would I like in this case? The Greeks or the Macedonians?
Wait, if you liked Israel or
you liked the more powerful group?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Like Greek. You would like Greece, I guess. I mean, so back then, we're going to talk about Macedonia, like dominating Greece,
dude,
right?
Sure,
Or Athens.
You just want
to do this? We're not going to play while we're.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm going to mute Howard.
Sorry, dude. Well, just really quick, Derek was interrupting, but Maverick, I just gotta say the obvious incorrect piece that you're failing here is that in all three of these cases, there's a right perspective and a wrong perspective, where it's like obviously Russia are the bad guys, obviously Israel are the good guys, and obviously Greece are the good guys.
Okay.
Okay, dude.
So sick. Okay, we're gonna move on. So Aristotle's Macedonian. His father was the court physician to King Amentius of Macedon. Amentius's son is Philip II, and Philip II's son is
Philip III?
Shit. No, Alexander the Great. And so Alexander the Great goes on to conquer all of Greece and most of the known ancient world to the west. And guess who Alexander the Great's teacher was? Who mentored and taught?
Socrates.
No, Aristotle. This
Aristotle.
dude. We're
Okay,
talking about
Aristotle.
Aristotle.
Yeah.
So
Okay, sorry.
Aristotle's again.
How many
Aristotle's
years
father.
did we jump? Sorry, real quick. How many years did we just skip?
We just skipped 40 years or so.
Between Socrates and Aristotle? 40
Plato's
years.
an old man. Plato's an old man now. So Socrates is long dead, a generation ago.
Wow.
These are we're everything I've told you about has occurred over 3 generations.
That's wild. So not only are their thinkers better, but they're occurring at an increased interval. You know what I mean?
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
40 years?
we have good
Aristotle?
thinkers. We have good thinkers. We just more diffused now, you know, like it's hard for us to stand out, I think.
Okay.
So his father's the court physician to King Amentius, who's Alexander the Great's grandfather. So Aristotle is a sort of father-ish figure to Alexander after King Philip dies, whatever, for a while. This is all dramatized in the movie. What's it called? Is it called Alexander the Great? I forgot what it's called. The one with Colin Farrell.
Yes.
Yeah. And Aristotle is played by Christopher Plummer or somebody like that in that movie. It's a 3-hour movie. I remember enjoying it. We watched it in the recovery house. So Alexander the Great is the future king during the time that he's being advised and mentored and taught by Aristotle. By the time he becomes king, Aristotle sort of falls out of favor in some respects, but there's some evidence that there was some continued conversation or letters being passed and stuff like that. So anyway, Aristotle founded his own school called the Lyceum, which is a sort of rival to Plato's academy. Plato had died while Alexander was a student there, and did I say Alexander? I meant Aristotle. Aristotle went to Plato's school, the academy. Plato dies, and Aristotle was sort of feeling like he was next in line, like he was going to be in charge of the academy. It didn't turn out that way. One of his rivals got the job, and so Aristotle left Athens and went all over the world, taught Alexander, ended up coming back and started his own school in Athens called the Lyceum. And this was, the decline of Platonism was sort of coincided with the rise of Aristotelianism. A quarter of his writings survive today. That's about 200. It's about 2,500 tightly printed pages in English. But this is a small percentage of the amount of writings that Aristotle actually did. So most of it didn't survive. And he covered the gamut from ethics and politics to metaphysics, logic, epistemology, rhetoric, aesthetics, zoology, biology, physics. Anything that you can think about, Aristotle had something to say about. So this is the famous painting of. Are you guys looking at this? It's just my computer's all fucking weird. Are you guys looking? Oh god.
Yeah, it's showing.
trying,
It's displaying correctly.
Okay, good, cool. You guys don't have to look at it. I just want to make sure it's there. So because on my computer, I don't see it. Except, okay, great.
I'm painting my toy. I'm painting my toy army man,
Yeah,
but I can see it.
Don't worry. I just want to make sure it's there in case you wanted to look at it.
Oh my God.
So this painting by Raphael. Raphael is one of the Ninja Turtles. From 1510, painted in 1510 or 11. In the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican. So this is a really famous painting. It's called the School of Athens. It doesn't depict anything that actually would have happened, but it has all sorts of nuggets in here. And what our eyes are drawn to is what's happening right in the center, which is a conversation between Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle's holding the book, The Ethics, which we read for today, and his hand is outstretched pointing to the ground, where Plato, standing next to him, is his fingers pointing up. And this signifies much of what both Plato and Aristotle's, much of what they have to say. Plato says we must understand the good, we must understand the righteous, the just, the grand ideas. We will work down to us, but from the universal. We must comprehend the truth, and then we can understand the world, right? That's the sort of logic of Plato, Platonism. When something is Platonic, well, that's oftentimes what we're saying. We're saying that there's a perfect version of it somewhere, and Plato says it's up there, right? And then we can discern the world around us because we understand the truth that we get from up there. Aristotle throws that out the window, and it's a much more common way of, it's a much more modern way, frankly, of understanding the world, understanding science. What he says is we must look at the world. Look, it's right there on the ground. Our feet are on the ground. Let's look at the ground. We will study the world. We will use the scientific method or something approaching it. And we will determine truths based on that. It's deductive reasoning rather than Plato's inductive reasoning. So Plato's pointing up for idealism. Aristotle's pointing down for empiricism.
Do they like talk about like socialism versus individualism in there? Like,
We
is-
will
am I
talk
getting
about
into
we will
that?
talk about communitarianism, which is Aristotle.
Okay.
But as far as political economy, all of the ancients shared, and I'll just tell you I didn't focus on the political economy of the ancients because most of them don't really disagree about this. They say something like the richest man should have no more than 5 times the amount that the poorest man does. But they don't agree, but they don't say something like, they don't say something like, there exists a perfect, market where, things work out according to what they, are supposed to based on.
Isn't 5 times 0 0?
Well, yeah, so that's a good point. Maybe, so
Right, like,
Plato and Aristotle, they all maybe would have agreed to some form of welfare state. They just don't spend a whole lot of time talking about this. This wasn't really a topic of politics, as it appears to us. I don't
Right,
think.
because they had slaves and the invisible hand was just working for them and they didn't even know it.
Yeah. And so what else do they say about economics? Aristotle spends a lot of time in this book. I didn't include it in the reading, but he spends a lot of time talking about how rich folks sort of like have the wrong idea about like what is good in life. Of course, Plato said the same thing. He dismissed Cephalus right away in the Republic. Cephalus was sort of a very rich man who was, concerned about himself in a way that, we might recognize as being philanthropic, but, maybe ultimately more about yourself feeling good for having a bunch of money. And Plato through Socrates sort of brushes him aside as being, not concerned with justice. So, all of them had a sort of socialist in the ist part, of the word, idea of like political economy, but they certainly weren't, they just weren't really concerned about this.
They were royalty. They were like up there. They weren't concerned about it because they were obviously way richer than those who care about that.
You certainly had to have a certain amount of leisure in order to be thinking about these sorts of things. And if you were, it's likely that, if folks could write, we might have evidence that other folks, thought about political economy other than the well-off. But we don't have evidence. We don't have writings that survived since until now because nobody could write except for those that were well secured. So it's hard for us to say things about this. Economics will certainly come more into play in the weeks ahead. That will certainly become a hinge point of politics. Politics really becomes a debate over economics at some point here. It's just we're not there yet. So, but what politics is about is ethics at this point. It's about like how to live a good life, right? And so, you know, in the book that we're reading, again, the Ethics by Aristotle, it's chiefly concerned with this idea of ethics, discerning the goods of life, the means of realizing those goods. And so there's this idea of a good, which is strange, you know. There's one supreme good way to live a good life, to live a life, which is good, and to which all other goods are subordinate. The work of ethics is figuring out what that good is. That's what ethics is. It's not really the way that we think of morality as some sort of system of behavior that humans have with each other, that like some sort of agreement that we all share. That's what we think of morality is. Ethics to Aristotle, it's not really the same thing. It's more of like a how we've all agreed to behave a certain way because it's going to lead us to a good life. Not really. It's like it's not really. There isn't like a sense that it is adhering to some universal truths or something like that, which I think is the idea that we have with morality. But we'll move on.
So essentially, he was like a front runner of like absolutism, or like the opposite of this idea of moral relativity. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, he is not a moral relativist. Neither was Plato. Absolutism, I think, is Plato. I think that like Aristotle's a little less rigid as far as like he might think that the good life for somebody might be different than somebody else, but we're going to get into that soon. I think it's right to say that like Aristotle's not a moral relativist. That's a good way to sort of begin trying to place him. So this is the outline of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what this idea of the chief good is. We're going to talk about political science. It seems like a strange thing to put in there, but Aristotle thinks it's right there. It's like it's important to talk about political science right after talking about the chief good. We're going to talk about happiness, and then we're going to talk about virtue. These are all going to make sense. We're asking this question is, what is a good life? That's what Aristotle's asking, and that's what he's going to tell us. And these are the 4 things that he thinks tell us what that is. So, like I said, first we're going to get into this idea of the chief good, and he begins the text. I sent you the text, the PDF. He begins with this quote. He says, "Every art, every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit is thought to aim at some good. And for this reason, the good has been rightly declared that which all things aim." I emphasized a couple words there. And so this might sound like gobbledygook, you know, what is he talking about? Basically, what he's saying is we all do something for a reason, right? Don't we? It's sort of platitudinous, right? we sort of say like we do everything for a reason. We don't do anything for anything. But he's sort of like being more expansive with this idea. It's not that we do everything for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. It's the idea, right? And it's all the reasons we're going to find out.
Ridiculous.
But he's referring to human behavior, right? Not like this spiritual idea.
Right now he's saying human behavior, but we'll see. It's a teleological worldview. And it's only and this is how everybody thought.
What does teleological mean?
It means the ends. It means that we need to just determine what the ends are, what the end of action is, what the end of pursuits, the reason why we're doing things, the reason why things happen. If we can figure that out, we will understand.
The reason by Hoobastank?
We will understand what is going on with any action. So again, this is a teleological worldview, and it's opposite. It is straight up opposite of the way that we think. And what threw this on its head was the 17th century scientific revolution. We now conceive of behavior, plants, animals, persons, institutions, whatever, as the confluence of inputs. We think of them as like, if we know the antecedent conditions that make things happen, we will understand why things happen, right? We do not think of like some state of affairs that's like proper to physical nature. And so the modern conception of nature is actually really different from Aristotle's. We use the term natural to describe the way things are when they're not affected by human contrivance. So like a natural blonde, for example. We use that to say like, no, nobody has changed this person's hair. It's naturally blonde, right? But Aristotle would include human contrivance among the things that are natural or unnatural, So like a society like ours where women have, equal rights under the law, at least, that would be unnatural. It's human contrivance, but one could sort of contrive. One could act.
Isn't that a human? Isn't
Yeah.
that
So
can you expand on that? How is that unnatural for you go? Yeah.
Well, so I did cart a little before the course here, but like so he has this whole hierarchy set up, right? Man above women, humans above animals, God above humans. There's a hierarchy of
so
thought.
The fundamentals of what is natural is all fucked up in his mind.
Not really. It makes a lot of sense to him. But already we're hitting at the parts of Aristotle that are unsatisfactory to us. Which is that he has this idea that like certain people are naturally slaves. It's okay. I'll just be more in control of the muting and stuff. Certain people are naturally slaves, right? People have the bodies of a slave, he thinks. And so that means that they're naturally slaves. That like, and yet and I really wanted to talk about this next week because this is actually when he talks about slavery in the next book. But like,
what's the natural body for a slave?
Well, what do you think? What do you think that would be? He says this. What do you think? Why do you think he says that?
I don't know. I want you to explain.
I want you to say what you think.
Yeah. So if you were going to draft a baseball team of folks that were going to like do manual labor all day, lift heavy blocks,
body. Part of body.
Yes. And so
slow of mind.
Exactly. And so he thinks folks like that are naturally slaves. But what's the mistake that he makes there? So he looks around, he uses his empiricism, uses his eyes and his reason. He says, some of these folks are better at doing manual labor. They're better at, lifting up blocks and stuff. That means they're naturally supposed to do that. What's the mistake that he made?
They can revolt easier and kill their masters.
No, well, sure, that maybe is a mistake, but like he's not really at risk of, of this. It's more like a mistake of reasoning. He's saying that the reason why these folks are this way is because they're naturally slaves. What is the reason we know why some people are stronger? Let's say after they've been doing this job for 20 years and they're just buff as fuck. They're super strong.
Causality versus.
Yes, he is confusing causes for effects, right? Sure. He's saying some people are good at being slaves, and he's only pointing at the slaves, and he's saying like these folks, he's pointing at the folks that have been doing slavery, that have been working this way for 20 years. And so of course they're going to be better at it. And so this is and he does the same thing with women, right? He says women can't do politics, women can't reason in the same way that men can. And it's just natural. And we should, that's just the way it is. And he does he makes the same mistake where he confuses the effects of a society engendering a certain type of people to do something. And he says that that's natural. But what he doesn't see is how that society has actually, to use the word that Maverick likes to use all the time, has like an invisible hand has sort of molded these folks to look that way, to act this way, to not be able to think this way or something like that, right? And so this is a confusion, this mistake that Aristotle makes, that every student ever who encounters Aristotle wants to sort of criticize him for. This is a mistake that we make all the time, as in our politics, in our talking to each other. We make this mistake everywhere. We confuse causes for effects in our political lives all the time. And so it's just something to think about, just have in mind, am I ever, thinking in a way, am I ever like
So give me an
being
example.
determinist?
Okay, so give me an example. You're me, and you hate all the things that I hate. Where am I? What mistake am I
Well,
making?
so
The
the
Republican
sorts of casual racism that sometimes come out of our mouths when we say things like, certain groups of people, commit more crimes or aren't able to
So, okay.
aren't able to like perform certain jobs, right? Like I would rather hire a certain type of person rather than a certain type, because I just know that this type of person isn't very good at this job or whatever, right? What we do is we think that that is a natural state of occurrence, right? And Aristotle does the same thing with women and slaves. Whereas what is actually happening here is
Okay.
as we have sort of created a society that has caused these people to be this way, right? It's sort of missing a input there, right? So this is all to say, and it's confusing that I do say this, because Aristotle actually, for the most part, 95% of the time, is attuned to this sort of thing. His empirical reasoning actually gets him past a lot of these mistakes most of the time, except for slavery and women. For some reason, that's the sort of thing that he can't get around. But again, this is all to say that for Aristotle, the ends of action, the ends of everything is what's important. If we can understand its purpose, is another way to describe this concept of teleology. Its purpose, its aim, its pursuit, its ends, its function. Everything has a purpose. And so if we can understand that, we will understand why it's acting this way. So all this to say is that the idea of the good, or the aim of life, right, is like we should find out what we are supposed to do. And then that will tell us, or we should find out what we're like, how we're supposed to be, and that'll tell us what to do, right? I think that's the way to frame that. So again, the idea of the chief good, I want to pull up my reading here. Let me see if I can do this. That doesn't, did I close it? Okay, there we go. Book 1, chapter 2, 935. So again, he has just said everything acts for a reason. We should determine what that is. If then there is some ends of the things we do which we desire for its own sake, everything else being desired for this, and if we do not choose everything for the sake of something else, for at that rate the process would go on to infinity, so that our desire would be empty and vain. So this is one way of saying this, and I do this all the time with students, to say like, why are you in this class? And I get all sorts of answers. I get like, well, I'm majoring in this topic, or I'm just interested in this topic, or like it's at 10 o'clock on Tuesday and I'm on campus anyway, or whatever. And then so like I keep asking them this question. Well, okay, well, why are you doing that? Well, I want to graduate. Okay, why do you want to graduate? Well, I want to get a job. Why do you want to get a job? I want money. Why do you want money? So I can be secure. Okay, why do you want to be secure? Well, eventually we get somewhere, right? And that's Aristotle's idea here. If there's some ends of the end of things we do which we desire for its own sake. I don't desire, my students didn't desire a degree or to be in my class for its own sake, right? Nobody.
What's the end?
Well, I wonder if you can tell me, but like we are going to get there.
I think I can.
What is it?
What's funny about that is, to me, it's the exact opposite of every like fears inventory I've ever had a guy do. Right? It's the exact opposite of, why are you afraid of this? Okay, why are you afraid of that? Okay, why are you afraid of that?
Yeah, it's true.
And then at the very end, you always get to like, I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of dying alone. Those are the two. That's the end of that questioning, at least.
That's cool. That's a sunum malum way to think about this. I'm talking about the sunum ballum, the ends of all things that are good or bad, right?
It actually all boils down to a fear of dying, but that's besides the point.
I actually disagree based on Herb Kagan's workshop.
That's
No.
that's how I began like a month ago. I did say that like we're all afraid of dying without being remembered, and that's why we're that's like why we fucking care about like living a good life or being a good person. That's why we do politics, essentially. That was the argument of the course, Mitch.
Dan, I wonder if the reason why some of us think we should own guns and some of us think we shouldn't own guns would ultimately boil down to the same sunum ballum, dude.
Can I please continue before we talk about this? So there are some things we do which we desire for its own sake, which is crazy, right? That's an interesting thought, for its own sake, right? And we do not choose everything for the sake of something else. At some point, we're going to get something that we want for itself and not because it helps us get something else, right? Clearly, this must be the good and the chief good. Will not the knowledge of it then have a great influence on life? Shall we not, like archers who have a mark to aim at, be more likely to hit upon what is right? If so, we must try and outline at least to determine what is, and of which of the sciences or capacities it is the object. It would seem to belong to the most authoritative art, and that which is most truly the master art. And politics appears to be of this nature. For it is this that ordains which of the sciences should be studied in a state, and in which each class of citizens should learn and up to what point they should learn them. And we see even the most highly esteemed of capacities to fall into this. Example given: strategy, economics, rhetoric. Now, since politics uses the rest of the sciences, and since, again, it legislates as to what we are to do and what we are to abstain from, the end of this science must include those of the others, so that this end must be the good for man. Okay, that was crazy. What does he have? This is the argument that I just read something that your guys' ears didn't pick up on everything, I'm sure. But this is the steps of the argument I have in here. Premise 1: human life has one chief.
We're retarded, and you're right.
Human life has one chief good. I'm going to mute you, Howard. One chief good or aim. Okay, we all agree on this. Premise 2: good or aim toward which all of the other subordinate goods or aims are directed at is chief good or aim. So we do everything for this one reason, essentially. Premise 3: there is an overarching science of the chief good. There's a process by which we can determine what this chief good is. Premise 4: the science to which all other sciences are subordinate is the science of the chief good. That's a claim that maybe is debatable for us, right? Because he just told, the conclusion here is that politics is the science of the chief good. But he's saying that everything else is subordinate to it. Physics, rhetoric, strategy, economics, all other, pursuits of the sciences are subordinate to politics. And his argument there, the reason why are subordinate is because they all collapse into politics, because politics determines which of these are worthwhile to pursue and who should pursue them and for how long. He thinks that they're all subordinate to politics. Actually incorporates everything else we know about the world, about ourselves, and determines how much of this knowledge is actually worthwhile, who's it actually going to help to pursue it. This is the idea here. Politics is the science of the chief good of life. That's not how we would describe politics, is it? But that's his argument. What do you guys think about that?
But we've already established that his definition of politics is very different from like our current modern day fucking watching dumbass liberals and conservatives argue with each other.
Right. We said that Constant would, last week we had that idea, right? But like his definition of politics collapses into it all the other sciences. And we know that that's not how we talk about science, but like why is that wrong? I guess. Why are we more correct to like differentiate and say?
I wouldn't say that. Well, I would say because if I'm going to play your game and like say that it is wrong, I would say it's because we've become so much more specialized, and the breadth of knowledge that we operate with allows us to drill down into things in a way that was impossible for them, right? The specialization and the depth of knowledge is exponentially, at least in the hard sciences, exponentially greater than theirs. You could argue that in the realm of politics or philosophy, perhaps not so much, but yeah.
But who decides expertise in science?
Well, it's fucking empirical. What do you mean? It's like it's real or it's not. Like it's provable or it's not.
Tell that to the vaccine deniers, Howard.
Well, the
Well-
vaccine deny. You mean the experimental mRNA
It's right,
fucking
it's true.
vaccine that fucking kills people?
This
Yeah,
is true.
you're right.
That's a really good point, Derek.
It's
That's
provable.
essentially what I'm after here.
I feel
Like
like
you say that, and then you don't act on it, Howard.
That's not true.
You
The
can't
fucking
choose-
evidence shows me that,
But you're choosing what is not empirical evidence with no knowledge of your own. Just like your gut feeling that
What?
mRNA is bad.
no, that's
Derek,
not.
that's great. I'm gonna mute you guys now because Maverick's gonna say something.
I was just going to say that to me, it's obvious that our current economic situation is the one that's determining whether we're going to answer that question
Okay,
yes
good.
or no. And back
Yeah.
then, they're saying yes. Obviously, politics is the greatest of all knowledges, but because of the influence of capital, we're now in a situation where even those things that they were just arguing about, the right and wrong of those, are so nuanced and entrenched and fucking tangled up in money
Yeah,
and profit motive that you can't know the truth of any of those. So I would say that,
that's great.
in our new economic system is the determining factor.
Okay,
Is
cool.
my-
So that's really good. I don't think I disagree with you, but what's more important, I think now is this idea that like we all sort of like, depending on the era we live in, that really, that determines what the chief good, what the science of the chief good is, we have a different way of sciencing out what the chief good is. And we use economics seemingly to do it. I almost want to set aside that part of the argument, which I think is right, but it just reveals that it's like, we can just decide which of these things we want to like elevate into the, into the chief science of the chief good and have everything else be subordinate to it. And Aristotle's era, he's saying that politics was the thing that we all had to get together to decide if empiricism should run science or not. That's essentially what most of his other books were about. He was arguing for empiricism against this like antiquated way of doing science before him.
What did he mean by political science? Can you say that? Can you almost, I feel like at this point you should just translate that word into what he actually meant.
Okay, ready, dude?
As Howard brought up.
You ready, dude? Idea of political science, because he knows that you're this is your question right now. And this is what he says about political science. Though it is worthwhile to obtain the end merely for one man, it is finer and more godlike to obtain it for a nation or for city states.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, there's more to say about this, but like his first pass definition of like the science of the chief good of political science is essentially something like ethics for the group, right? It's like, because we just talked about ethics as being, like the science of like achieving the ethics as like for an individual, it's like, how should I act to achieve the chief good? Political science is just expanding ethics, expanding the way that we think about why or how, or, the system of things that we think about in order to determine our actions, expanding that to the group. So obtaining the ends, and again, we're going to talk about what the end is. Obtaining it for the masses is political science. We should do political science because it's going to achieve the ends for everybody, or for at least for the greatest number of people possible. And so already we're hitting at the anti-individualism of Aristotle. The focus really is on the collective here.
Well, hold on. He's talking about actualizing something, which is the chief difference here, I feel like. For us, I feel like politics.
Mhm.
is he's talking about like actual governance. We're not talking about that. I mean, we are, but it's like so we don't even know the average man.
No, but here's the Maverick. While I agree with you, you're wrong, because if you talk to any politician, they would argue that no, that is what we're doing. We're running for office because we want to govern better and legislate better and blah 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 blah. So while in practice perhaps what you're saying is true, the stated purpose is certainly that.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like when he says that, his ideas aren't so lofty. Like he's about to like go and be like, hey, there's a fine for this now, or something. I don't know. I just feel like it was so much easier to enact his fucking his ideas than it is for us,
It's true. Yeah. And that was Constant said something about that. He said, this type of politics is lost to us, and it's sort of hopeless to think that we can implement it. But again, I don't think
he says realizing the end for the fucking nation, for the city state, right?
Yeah.
What is that? So
What is that?
So in those terms, he's literally talking about the same thing we are.
Yeah. It's not much different. Yeah. I mean,
well, the answer to the first question is no, then.
What's the first question? What's the question?
Is that the ultimate science or the big idea?
Okay.
Because in the fact, here's why. Just in the fact that there is a nation or is a city state is wrong. I think it should be the big city state. That's my opinion.
Oh. I thought you were gonna say like we all should be like nomads or monads, isolated to ourselves. But you're saying like there shouldn't be borders. The human race should sort of figure out.
Well, yeah, like if you're gonna take that idea and apply it to just this nation, then you also have to take that same and apply it.
It's finer and more like Lovecraftian godlike to obtain it for the race.
But like what? Hold on though, Maverick.
Yeah.
I don't understand that, because it's like, what if we're going back to this guy's assumptions about the importance of of like Constantinople, dude, us being engaged in fucking in all this shit as the populace.
Yeah.
To me, the logical conclusion of that is that we're going to sit in the fucking agora and talk about bullshit, and we're going to shape our little town to be, in our town, we wear fucking, black shirts aren't allowed, and we tax people for fucking having tiny wieners. But in the town across the street, everyone has to wear black shirts, and we tax people for having big wieners. And it's like, if we're engaging with politics based on the way that this dude wants us to, and which to me seems reasonable, the only possible outcome is city states. There has to be differentiation of laws, and so the borders are a natural conclusion. So I'm confused where you're like, well,
this will be good. This debate happens again. It'll happen in after the moderns come about, and during the founding of this country, the United States. This is a huge debate. How big can we reasonably make the political unit? This was a big debate, and we're going to talk about it. We'll read some stuff that folks have to say about it.
Okay. I won't rebut, but whatever.
I'm not like arguing. I'm more curious.
Yeah.
Like, how else do you accomplish? I'm genuinely curious. I don't have a fucking like a hard
so first of all, I mean, if you're asking me in the day of technology and everything you said, like sensitivity training needs aside about the wieners and stuff, what I would say is that in the age of technology, like we could easily create some sort of system similar to the United States, maybe, where we vote and agree upon things like the Athenians did or the Greeks did, but at a much larger scale. I don't see any reason we can't. We all have a cell phone in our hand and we all could click yes or no on it, So why at this point in time, there really is no communication issue?
That's not answering the question, though. Like, okay, yeah, agreed. But
Okay.
then what if this group of people in the south part of this continental mass that has no nation name all agrees on their phones that this is the fucking law, and then this other group of people in the northern part of this giant massive land, because we don't have nations or
So you're
distinctions
saying, like, how
anymore.
do we retain cultural
Yeah.
uniqueness? We don't. I think we don't. That's just my
Okay.
opinion. I think we just
Okay.
eat them up. We assimilate all.
So you
So
just
this is an end of history type argument. You know, this
We become the
we
border.
thought we were there. We thought that, you know, Western capitalism was going to become the sort of planetary vibe. Early 90s, this was a very common thought, and
It's a good
uh,
argument.
it
Howard.
seems
I hear
it
what you're saying.
seems a little delayed at best, if it or maybe wrong at worst. You know, the like it might just not work. You know, there's sort
Right.
of
Okay.
a rising counter hegemony. You know, that like a lot of folks are afraid of. But anyway, this is
Well,
all.
maybe it has to always be fluid. I mean, really, like when you're talking about it like this, those are all really good points. And maybe the borders and the laws and where they are enacted and aren't are all just fluid and moving constantly. You know,
This
maybe
will
that
come
is
up
what-
again, and we'll have better like meetings to like speak to it. The discussion will be better if we read stuff that's more about it. But the idea here is that politics is ethics for the masses. Like politics is about virtue. And so we'll talk about this again. You know, virtue signaling or whatever is sort of an oxymoron, or it's just sort of strange thing to say to Aristotle. He'll be like, of course, of course, politics is about virtue signaling. What else is it about? So anyway, this I won't spend a lot of time on this because it's besides the point that we want to make at this point. But he sort of softens politics. He understands it's not going to be a hard science. Our discussion will be adequate if it has much clearness as the subject matter admits of. We must be content then in speaking of such subjects with such premises to indicate the truth roughly and in outline, and in speaking about things which are true for the most part, right? Or for the most part true. He understands that the science of you know, the chief good, it's not going to be a hard science. There's going to be some softening. You know, politics is going to be squishy, right? We're not going to determine sort of much in the way of a universal truths, you know. And this is already sort of where we're hinting at, like, you know, some of his frustration with Plato. We'll actually talk more about his talking shit on Plato in a second here. But to continue with what he says, and with premises of the same kind to reach conclusions that are no better. In the same spirit, therefore, should each type of statement be received, for it is the mark of an educated man to look for precision in each class of things, just so far as the nature of the subject admits. So the nature of politics, it's not going to have much precision, you know, just as you guys are saying, you know, that there might be a debate here between, you know, culture in one region versus another. The good for one group might be slightly different than another. I think he sort of admits of this, and he's sort of coaching us to sort of be a little bit willowy, right? Less rigid. Political science, we claim the good for most people most of the time, I think is the idea. So I've said a lot about this without even telling you guys the sort of punchline. The most important thing, what is the chief aim? When I pull this up, you guys can see this, correct? The chief aim. Oh, he does this funny thing. So he loves doing this. He'll like, hey, I'm going to tell you guys what it is. First, I'm going to tell you guys 4 things what it's not. You know, so the chief aim of life is not the following, right? The vulgar type, you know, the vulgar, identify the good or happiness with pleasure, you know. You know, it's not, it's that's for like the animals, you know. Being just simply having pleasure is not really what we're after here. That's not what the chief aim of life. Right. So, and he says this, the mass of mankind, most folks are convinced of this, that they're after just pleasure. But that's a life suitable for beasts, is what he says here. But those of a superior refinement, an active disposition, identify the pursuit of life with honor. We should pursue honor as being like the course of life. He thinks that's better, but it's not quite the end of political life. Politics might have something more to say about something else rather than just pursuing honor. Furthermore, men seem to pursue honor in order that to be assured of their goodness, right? So honor seems to be the result of other people thinking something about you, which isn't really what he has in mind. That would be some in some ways lacking, and it would require some sort of like virtue ethic of the people, right? Like, and so it gets sort of like viciously circular at this point, because we would need to determine, we need politics to determine what is honorable. It's just not quite sufficient to be just after honor. And then he looks for the contemplative life. He's not quite convinced of the contemplative life. He'll talk about that later, because he'll actually tells us, this is why Plato's wrong. It's not really, life isn't really about just thinking, which is kind of what Plato was after. And then he tells us money making. Money making is the life of money making is one undertaking under compulsion. And wealth is evidently not the good we are seeking, for it is merely useful for the sake of something else. Right? This is something we say, right? We only pursue money for the sake of something else. And so he says pursuing money for its own sake is not really a good life. We would be sort of confused about like what we're up to if we do that. So this is all to say, we don't really know. I still haven't told you what the chief aim is. And this is the idea. The chief aim of life, the reason why we do everything, the ends of life, the science of political science is all about finding the way to happiness for everybody, right? The answer of the chief good of life is happiness. That's the punchline. But when we say happiness, we might have something in mind like this beasts, like the beasts. We might have pleasure in mind, right? Isn't that kind of what we have in mind when we say happy? We say somebody's happy and it's like, oh, I'm happy today. I'm happy this afternoon because something good happened to me this morning. It's sunny. I had a nice lunch. I had a good conversation. It's sort of like things happened to me and then I became happy as a result. That's the way that we think about happiness, at least moderns. But the word that he uses is eudaimonia. That's the Greek word, eudaimonia, and it does not mean a sort of fleeting feeling of happiness. It means flourishing. That's really the translation is flourishing. So it means living your best life, I think is the best way to describe what he means by happiness. It means like doing you, right? And this goes back to the teleos idea. It's like you are fulfilling your purpose. That's what being happy is. It's like you doing you, living your best life. You're not pursuing something that is incorrect. You're sort of like all in line, flourishing, fulfilling yourself. That's what he has in mind. And so it's, maybe when we say the word happy, we kind of have some of that in mind, but it's really important that we don't get confused between a sort of sunshiny day and good vibes versus eudaimonia, which is flourishing. You're living your best life. So, like I said, eudaimonia, happiness, flourishing, well-being. These are all different ways to talk about this. It's a broad term. Whatever makes human life good for the person living it. 941, we have some things to say about it. Let me see here. Now we call that which is in itself worthy of pursuit more final than that which is worthy of pursuit for the sake of something else, right? And that which is never desirable for the sake of something else more final than the things that are desirable both in themselves and for the sake of that other thing. And therefore we call final without qualification that which is always desirable in itself and never for the sake of something else. Now such a thing happiness above all else is held to be, for this we choose, always for itself and never for the sake of something else. That was his, finally, the punchline.
Can you say that again? Can you break that down? I don't
Well,
know.
so finally, yeah, he tells us finally, pages later, right? This is very, very reminiscent of this idea that like we pursue some things for the sake of other things. The reason we do something is because we want to get something else. Eventually, we're going to get to an end of that, right? The reason why students take my class is because they want money, whatever. Eventually, it's to be happy. That's the claim that he says here, is that we pursue it not for the sake of something else. We don't pursue happiness for the sake of something else. We pursue it for its own sake. And that's the only thing we pursue for its own sake. That's what he says.
Okay, got it.
And but again, this seems sort of platitudinous, right? It begs the question, what constitutes happiness for human beings, right? And I think he even does say, doesn't he say like this seems platitudinous? Yeah, presumably, however, to say that happiness is the chief good seems a platitude, right? It seems sort of boring. Of course, Aristotle. Duh, you know. A clear account of what it is still desired. This might perhaps be given if we could first ascertain the function of man, blah, 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 blah. What is the function of man? All this stuff, right? The function of man cannot be the vegetative part of our lives, right? Because that we have in common human beings. Like, so he's trying to figure out what human beings are, right? Because that's going to tell us what being a happy thing is, right? The ends of human beings are. So we have life we have in common with all other forms of life the first thing, the vegetative part of our lives, which is we grow but we cannot sense, right? That's a part of our lives, and it's also the part of vegetables, right? Plants, they grow but they cannot sense. This is what he says. Of course they can sense in some way, but like that's not really empirically, he hasn't determined that, right? This is the start of that type of science. So we haven't gotten there yet. But the vegetative part, it grows, but it cannot sense. We have in common with that. We also have in common with animals some things. They grow and sense, but they cannot reason. Finally, it's a thing that's unique to human beings, is the fact that we grow, we sense, and we reason. So we have all three, right? We have the third one, the most important, the reasoning part of our lives, the reasoning part of our bodies, or of our life. Is the thing that's unique to us, and so it's the thing that tells him what the function of man should be, right? I just explained this part. So he goes on to say that the function of man is an activity of the soul which follows or implies a rational principle, right? So if we act according to our reason, that's going to be the function, right? That's going to be us acting correctly. Has all this crap to say about lyre players and tennis players and flutists and stuff like that. Human good turns out to be an activity of soul in accordance with virtue. And if there are more than one virtue, in accordance with the best and most complete. So, well, of course, there's this idea of the split self. It's very common. I mean, so the way that I would tell my students is like, we're all rational. I'm rational, but like sometimes there's an animal, there's two wolves inside of me, right? Sometimes I have to eat ice cream in the middle of the night. Sometimes I eat chocolate. Sometimes I have Tootsie Rolls, whatever, and it's like, there's no rationality to that, right? Like, I know that I'm trying to like gain muscle. I need to keep my protein up. Calories have to come from protein. All these things, but then the animal comes out, right? The animal comes out at some point. And so we have this split self, and we have to use our reason to subdue our animal. That's Aristotle.
This guy sucks, dude. I literally just disagree with everything.
Well,
Aristotle.
this is like extremely influential. This is the recovery house, you know, like
I don't know, bro.
this
It's like
is-
almost like I just have to keep reminding myself it's not about disagreeing with this guy. It's about learning. It's about
Yeah.
learning said to set a foundation because he's just so obviously
Yeah.
wrong about it.
we're gonna dismantle all this shit for sure. But like, you know, this is where everybody started by reading this fucking guy. So it's not just that we have a split self. It's we have a three set. It's not the irrational and or animal. We actually have three wolves inside of us. There's the rational, there's the will, and then there's our animal. So the idea is to get our will on our side, on our rational side. The will is the thing that actually moves us, right? It's like the sort of like active part of the soul. And so we have to use our reason to get our will in alignment. Most of the time, if we're not using our reason, our will is going to be in alignment with our animal. And so this will be a problem. And this is another way to say it: reason versus will versus desire, right? Desire is animalistic. We have this sort of inner animal. It comes out if we don't have our will in line with our reason. And so I already told you, so the key to human happiness is the active soul, right? We have to, I already read you this quote, but the idea is that we're going to be using our reason to take hold of our will and wrestle it away from our animal. And virtue has something to say about this, right? Which is the answer to this question, right? How does one become happy? So this is all that is to say, we become happy, Aristotle thinks, by acting virtuously. So this is like sort of the key to Aristotle's ethics: virtuous action.
Okay, that one's not so bad. That one's okay.
But begs the question, what is virtue, right? So everything is sort of like unfolding into itself. What's the chief good of life is happiness. How do we acquire happiness? By acting virtuously. What is virtue? Virtue is a state of character defined by moderation. Being a moderate is what's going to arrive us at virtue. How could that be? What is he talking about? Virtue is a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean, this being determined by a rational principle. It is a mean between two vices, that which depends on excess and that which depends on defect. Virtue both finds and chooses what is intermediate. So this is the famous, Aristotelian mean idea, the golden mean. This all comes straight out of Aristotle. The mean, virtue, goodness, lies in the middle between defect and excess of whatever character trait, whatever action, whatever thought, whatever contrivance. Everything's going to be in the middle. So the famous ones are pride and courage. When you have proper pride, that means you have more pride you're more prideful than you might have false modesty, right? Everybody hates false modesty, right? But of course, everybody hates empty vanity as well, right? Just sort of like being very boastful or something like that. So you want to be in the middle. Same thing with courage. You don't want to be a coward, but you also don't want to be rash, right? And so virtue would be using your reason to say, I'm too far in one direction and I don't want to go too far in the other. That means I'm going to find right in the middle. And life, a virtuous life turns out to be determining what the mean is for every action that you can possibly think of. And again, how do we do this, right? We use our reason, but perhaps more importantly is through a habituation. Again, this is recovery house. This is this is AA. This is Christianity. This is like the Roman Catholic Church. We habituate ourselves into the proper action. By doing just acts, the just man is produced. By doing temperate acts, the temperate man. Without doing these things, no one would have even the prospect of becoming good. It's mental muscle memory, right? Athletes talk about getting into the flow state, right? Like they turn off their brain when they're like playing basketball and they're about to shoot the basket or whatever. They don't have to think about what they're doing. They've done it a billion times, and so therefore they're able to act this way without trying, right? And there's like a lack of effort that almost ends up happening once you've trained yourself to do this. And Aristotle very much thinks that this is how we can train people to be happy. If they can train themselves to act virtuously over and over and over and over again, they will no longer be able to lack virtue, right? Which of course goes down the train to happiness. If they're acting virtuously all the time, they will be happy. It's not that they will get happy. It's not what they will receive happiness by acting virtuously. It's they will be happy. Again, that's really important. It's like, it doesn't happen to you. You don't get happiness. You become a happy person by being a virtuous person. How does one exercise virtue? I already told you this. Judgment and action, we use our reason. We get in line with our will. And we act virtuously. And so again, this is all ethics, right? This all sounds very ethical. This sounds like stuff you would read in a self-help book. What does this have to do with politics? Well, this is what he has to say. The moral virtue is a mean, then, and in what sense it is so, and that is a mean between two vices, the one involving excess, the one in deficiency, and that it is such because its character is to aim at what is intermediate in passions and actions has been sufficiently stated. I've already told you guys this. Hence, also, it is no easy task to be good, for in everything it is no easy task to find the middle. To find the middle of a circle is not for everyone, but for him who knows. So too, anyone can get angry. That is easy, or give or spend money. But to do this to the right person, to the right extent, at the right time, with the right motive, and in the right way, that is not for everyone, nor is it easy. Wherefore goodness is both rare and laudable and noble. And so this is us using our judgment, right? And how, again, this sounds like it's too hard to do. This, like he's saying that, like, finding the middle of a circle, which, maybe I've always found that to be funny. It's like, isn't it easy to find the middle of a circle? I think what he means is like the mathematical middle of a circle. It might be kind of hard for us to sort of like pinpoint like the area of a circle. And I think that's what he has in mind, because he's saying that it's really hard, but those who know can find the middle of a circle. But so it's a very rare thing to sort of find this mean in all aspects of life. And this is what he has in mind. This is where politics comes back into the picture, because because of this. Political science spends most of its pains on making the citizens to be of a certain character, vis-a-vis good and capable of noble acts. So the purpose of politics, right? We've already said that it's the science of politics to determine the chief end, or to determine that to determine how everybody can be happy. And so therefore, the missing piece between politics and happiness is virtue, right? Politics needs to design the virtue of the masses such that they can all be happy. And I will go back here because it might seem a little circular before we end up incorporating politics into this, but it's not a vicious circle, right? It's sort of a virtue. It's a virtuous one. We ask what the good in life is, and we're told it's a happy life. We ask, what is happiness? It's pleasure achieved in the right way by the right sort of person. How do we know what the right way is? Well, we're going to know that because we're going to know what virtue is. And we ask about the virtues, and it's the habits of actions whose practices gives people happiness. And it's this sort of circle might be sort of it's not very satisfying to us. But again, it's because he hasn't given us the sort of the missing piece here, which is politics. The well-conducted life, again, is not for everyone to determine, right? He just told us that, right? We're with the judgment idea. Not everybody has this judgment. But all of us, even those of us without judgment, are a part of a larger machine whose well-functioning nature produces good outcomes for all. And so we all must act in a certain way in order to be virtue, in order to, produce happiness for everybody. And so that's this idea there, is that like, we're gonna like sort of force politics to be a virtuous practice that teaches everybody how to be virtuous so that they can all be happy. That's Aristotle's ethics. It's a sort of like pathway to politics. That's really what he has in mind. And so next week we actually get to like set aside this really boring, like recovery house style, like how to act shit. And we get to like talk about like slavery and women, and we get to like get our like hands dirty with like real political questions, stuff that we might recognize as political, because Aristotle's a communitarian. He thinks we act virtuously together. He thinks we exercise reason together. He thinks that achieving nobility is a process that happens together. And so we get to sort of have that really fun debate between individuals and communities and stuff like that. And that all sort of comes alive next week. But it is important. It was important that we sort of lay this foundation of like happiness comes from acting virtuously, which comes from, that's what he thinks politics can help us all act virtuously. So we just had to like lay that groundwork. Next week it gets fun, and then it's just more and more fun after next week. Next week is Aristotle's politics, and it's great. Anyway, do you guys have any questions?
No, it was dope.
Thanks.
Good
bro.
stuff.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thanks guys. What are you guys up to?
Me and Derek are playing. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me and Derek are playing Arkham, or we're setting up to play Arkham Horror.
Oh, nice.
We can hear you guys kissing pretty loudly.
That's
And
not
they're
happening.
kissing.
Oh, you know what dude's kissing sounds like?
There's 3 wolves inside of me.
3 of them are kissing.
One of them.
All of the wolves are Maverick, Derek, and Howard kissing.
Do you guys want to see where he talks shit on Plato? It's kind of funny.
Bro, Aristotle's a punk ass, dude. I don't like anything.
Yeah, a lot of folks like him a lot more than Plato, but I think they're wrong.
Really?
Dude,
I
I
feel
think
like he's
Aristotle's kind of a fucking
reactionary.
OG.
I feel like he's just confident without facts. I feel like he's
Put your
wrong
forehead
about all kinds of shit.
No. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Just moving it.
Just put it right here. Don't do that.
So he says, we had perhaps better consider the universal good and discuss thoroughly what is meant by it. Although such an inquiry is made an uphill one.
Should I order us food?
Yeah, order us.
Wait, hold
Although-
on. God, so rude.
Although such an inquiry is made an uphill one by the fact that the forms have been introduced by friends of our own, the capital F forms, it would perhaps be thought to be better indeed to be our duty, for the sake of maintaining the truth, even to destroy what touches us closely, especially as we are philosophers or lovers of wisdom, for while both are dear, piety requires us to honor truth above our friends. And then he goes on to spend like 3 pages talking shit on this idea of the forms and how like there's a universal, an ideal.
So how is that talking shit on Plato? I don't understand.
Well, so remember this idea of Plato's that like there exists in heaven. I don't know, he doesn't use that word obviously, but like there exists in the sort of eternal realm, the perfect form of anything that you have in mind. There exists something called justice there. There exists something called a chair. There exists the perfect circle. All these things happen in this like heaven. And the reason we know what a phone is, the reason we know what a cup is, the reason we can recognize a chair when we see one is because we remember our lives before we were born of in that perfect world, and we got access. We knew the truth of what a chair is. And that's why we can make a chair when we, want to make one without ever, learning much. Like we have the idea of a chair in our heads,
Okay.
the idea.
There's some universal truth of what a chair is.
Yeah. And so like Aristotle thinks this is complete fucking nonsense. This is that's idealism, that like Aristotle's an empiricist. We're going to look at the ground. We determine what a chair is based on its function. Somebody needs to sit in it. So let's make something that like sits well rather than like, some ordained idea, and so when he's talking shit on Plato here, he's basically, he's being really nice. He's saying like, he's a really close friend of mine. I owed a lot to him, but I owe allegiance to the truth more than to my friends.
Oh, got it.
And then he goes on to be like, basically like we are better off looking at the world and determining what the purpose of things are, rather than what they were meant to, rather than their ideal form. And so this is a fundamental debate in philosophy or epistemology, I guess, about like how to begin thinking about things. Should we start with their ends or should we start with their beginnings? And that's, Aristotle versus Plato. He has more to say about Plato, maybe not in this book, but yeah, that's always interesting.
Well, dude, we're all sitting down for dinner.
Okay. Yeah, let's wrap it up.
But thank you, dude, and I wish Anna a speedy recovery. And oh, you're still here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you get better soon. And
Hope
yeah,
you feel
everyone
better
else.
soon, Anna. Thanks again, Brian.
Yeah, next week's going to be a lot better.
Dude,
This
this
was the
was
boring-
great, bro.
We just had to
Sorry
lay
there's
this.
so many fucking peanut galleries out
We
here.
just
You're
had
killing
to.
it, dude.
No, I want the peanut gallery, and there's going to be more opportunity for it next week. And we just had to learn this virtue politics thing, and then we'll get more of it next week, and it'll be better.
Howard, I'm gonna send you some links to some sensitivity training, okay?
Dude, you can fucking. I'll send you a link to fucking these nuts.
Oh my god.
Address.
Thanks, Howard. All right, bye.
All right, see you guys.
Later, dudes.
See you later, dude. Thanks again.